This might not come as a surprise to you considering their response to Paris and San Bernardino, but trust in the Obama administration to protect us from a future terror attack is hitting new lows. A new Gallup poll says after San Bernardino, confidence in the federal government's ability to shield Americans from radical Islamic attacks has plummeted to a new low of 55%, while the New York Times survey shows fear of an attack is as high as it was after September 11th. 19% ranked terror threats as the top issue facing our country. Apparently, the polls are justified. On the Kelly file, Department of Homeland Security whistleblower Philip Haney made this stunning revelation about how the feds could have stopped San Bernardino attacks, but didn't.
You say they shut you down because they felt this was essentially profiling of Muslims.
They specifically said that because we FOIA'd the case. And we got the internal memos, and it says that we are not allowed to develop a case based on Tablighi Jamaat specifically and or any Islamic group. We started the case 6 years prior. Then I came to the National Targeting Center and worked on that case specifically. Then I went back to my home port, and I discovered that as soon as I left, they shut the case down.
Well, despite warnings from the FBI and DHS, when asked whether the president would travel to California in the wake of the deadly attack, Press Secretary Josh Earnest was in a state of denial, again referring to gun violence rather than terrorism.
I've not asked him this question directly. I'm sure that it's something that somebody here has considered. It's not uncommon for the president in the aftermath of some of these kinds of incidents to visit these communities that were touched so directly by an incident of gun violence.
Guess what? You said this yesterday.
Yeah,
you pointed this out yesterday.
But so the president actually, he gave a primetime address from the Oval Office, only his third in his administration, in which he said what the FBI said. He called it a terrorist attack. And yet, 4 days later, in a press briefing, Josh Earnest doesn't repeat what the president said. I mean, you're not going to go beyond what the president said by calling it a terrorist attack because the president already did that. I mean, trying to water it down and saying incidents like these, no, this was the largest terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. It's not any of the other horrible mass shootings that President Obama's had to go to. There was a distinction here. And I thought Adam Housley said something really important on our show. Is at the very end, when we had him right before that breaking news with the press conference about the lake and the search there. Yesterday was the first funeral for one of the victims, and he said that the families have been very patient, but it has come time for them to find out why didn't authorities know anything about this? Why didn't we have the ability to try to at least detect it and try to prevent it? And those answers have been very slow to come.
Greg, any surprise that the Americans' fear of terror is at its highest level since 9/11 and confidence in the administration is at its lowest level under the administration, under Obama?
They should be scared. In this case, fear-mongering makes total sense. Think about, you learn a lot about somebody's priorities by their reactions after a major threat. By talking about guns after the biggest terror attack since 9/11, that is like washing your dishes during a house fire. And Ernest calling terrorism gun violence is like referring to cancer as a growth of cells. It is factually correct, but it offers no help in trying to figure out solutions. Here's why this is a problem. There's a distinct difference between the left and right. The right usually believes, rightly or wrongly, that the biggest problems are out there in the rest of the world. For the left, it's always the biggest problems are within. It's us. We are the problem. Sometimes we are right, sometimes we are wrong. But in the case of terror, the right is right. Terror takes precedence over unisex bathrooms, bullying, and childhood obesity, but the left can't get that through their heads. And that ends up ultimately them embracing people like Chavez or Mao or Stalin because their internal failure, their internal guilt forces them never to admit that America is better.
Yeah, and being wrong in this case is deadly.
Yeah,
we'll tell you. KG,
Hmm.
Philip Haney, the whistleblower there, said there was a fear of saying something because there was a worry about being labeled as racist because of profiling. We heard the same thing from the neighbors of Farouk and his wife saying, we saw stuff, but we didn't want to say anything. We didn't want to be racist.
And we've talked about this, and that's why political correctness and this fear that hangs over everyone like a dark cloud is making this country less safe. That's it. PC is equal to less safe. And that's thanks to this administration and the indoctrination that they've put not only for the people that work with them, but just that whole feeling of, like, you know, guilt over the country. If you are even to want to say something because you see something that isn't right, then you're the bad guy in the room and not the other person who in fact might be. And that's a real crippling fear and emotion that people have, sort of a dread over them, worried about, okay, I'm going to be in trouble because of this. I mean, look at Comey. Comey can't go out and make a press conference or make a statement without Loretta Lynch as his babysitter to keep him on the White House talking points. I mean, it's really awkward.
Are we not less safe than we've ever been?
I think the problem with the president, and I believe that he will pay due respect to the victims of the slaughter in San Bernardino. The real problem, though, is that he's not waging the kind of war that we have to wage against an enemy that my mom at 96 knows exactly who the enemy is. It is ISIS. It is in Syria and Iraq. They have a geographic territory. Why aren't we defeating an enemy sworn to our destruction?
Yeah.
I think it is, yes, it's his language. Yes, he's too cool for school. Yes, he had the unfortunate coincidence of the climate conference coming on the heels of the worst violence in Paris since World War II. But still, he could be the military leader. That Oval Office address that Dana mentioned at the top of the program, that was the time. That was the time for him to be FDR on December 7th and say, this is the enemy. We will, I promise you, rest assured, and we would have been somewhat calm.
Instead, we got a speech on, a lecture on gun violence and also a lecture on making sure we're tolerant now going forward. You're right. He had an opportunity.
But I think that those are also valid things.
But there's a weird hypnotic spell, like with the way when you're describing President Obama. It's a weird, almost like they're programmed. They can't get out of this programming from their academic history that says America is wrong. He can't bring himself to admit that the threat is out there. Do you notice that it's almost hypnotic? He can't break it.
New York PD had what was called a demographics unit. The demographics unit paid attention to Muslim neighborhoods because the obvious connection is Muslim neighborhood. People can get together, they can talk about the bad things, and it was so politically incorrect that they disbanded when de Blasio became the mayor in 2014.